The air crackled with tension, a deadly silence settling over the dense forest. The trees loomed like silent witnesses, their branches swaying gently in the wind, concealing the danger that lurked beneath. Suddenly the stillness was broken by the low growl of a predator, its eyes gleaming with hunger. The animal's muscles rippled beneath its fur as it stalked its prey, the scent of fear in the air. Its movements were methodical, calculated, each step an approach toward a kill. The victim, unaware of the impending doom, remained motionless, unaware of the death that shadowed its every move. The predator's form, sleek and menacing, broke through the underbrush with terrifying speed. Its gaze fixed upon the prey, narrowing with focus. With a sudden surge, the predator lunged, its jaws wide open, intent on ending the chase. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The prey's eyes filled with fear. The predator's jaws poised for the kill. It was the natural order, cruel and unforgiving. The chase was over in a heartbeat, and the forest returned to its eerie silence, only the sound of heavy breathing filling the void. Night pressed close, and the clearing smelled of iron and pine. Ash dragged breath through aching ribs and listened for pursuit. Selene said, "Do not waste victory, save it." Finn nosed the air and whimpered at the metallic scent. Hunger prowled the edges like an unseen packmate. Dane watched from the birches, eyes cold as river stones. Ash said, "We move before the wind turns." The trees answered with a hush that felt like warning. A barn owl wrote pale circles above the firs. Selene said, "Leave the bones, keep the lesson." Finn stumbled, then steadied under Ash's shoulder. The moon slipped behind a cloud and the dark grew teeth. Dane melted backward, but the feeling of being measured remained. The forest held its breath, and the ground seemed to tilt toward danger. Wind veered, and with it the smell of men, smoke, and old metal. "Selene," said Southridge, "now." Ash felt the world tighten like a snare. Finn skittered over ice skins on puddles, paws clacking soft. Dane paced parallel, patient as frost. A distant clatter rolled across the valley, thin and wrong. Ash said, "Keep low and follow my tail." The stars blinked through rifts like watchful embers. A fox barked once, then silence folded shut. Selene said, "River path hides our heat." The ground broke into roots and shadows, each a question. Finn stumbled again, breath squeaking, courage loud in small bones. Ash brushed him forward with a flank and swallowed doubt. Somewhere behind, a hinge squealed, and the dark learned their names. The trap announced itself with silence too complete to trust. Ash halted so fast the pack's breath piled into him. Selene said, "Smell the rust, see the churned moss." A bare patch glimmered under leaves, cruel and waiting. Finn reached, curious, and Ash blocked with a paw. Dane watched, tail still, learning their rhythm. Ash said, "Circle wide and break the scent." The wind fought them, flicking gusts that smudged clues. A moth tapped Selene's ear like a warning bell. Finn trembled but held his ground, brave as tinder. Selene said, "Step where my foot falls, and nowhere else." The earth creaked, old hinges remembering teeth. Ash led a slow arc, muscles burning with carefulness. Behind them a spring groaned, and the forest flinched. They cleared the snare field, and the night loosened a notch. Ash said, "Water," then ridge. Finn lapped at a black pool, tongue whispering circles. Selene listened to the earth, head tilted, hearing plans. The wind turned merciful and carried their heat away. Dane's scent thinned, replaced by wood smoke and rain promise. A cloud split, and stars spilled like spilled salt. Selene said, "Remember the hush that saves you." Finn bumped Ash and grinned a small bright grin. Relief arrived in thin slices, sharp as needles. Ash said, "Tonight we live, so tomorrow must be earned." The forest accepted them with a sigh of wet leaves. Somewhere, an axe bit wood, then stopped. The ridge rose ahead, dark as a vow. Ash limped ahead, ribs aching from the hunt, breath steaming in the crisp morning air. Selene said, "Pain teaches faster than comfort." Her eyes scanned the ridge, cautious but firm. Finn stumbled behind, small paws slipping on frost, and whimpered, "I can keep up." Ash brushed his muzzle against him, steadying the pup. The valley spread below, scarred by smoke trails from human fires. "Selene," said every tree, "cut is a wound we cannot heal." Dane lingered on the slope, watching the family with narrowed eyes, hunger driving his patience. Ash growled low, reminding him of rank. The air shifted, carrying the scent of hair, thin and faint. Finn's ears perked, hope flashing in his eyes. "Ash," said, "food first, answers later." The ridge wind howled, carrying their promise and their dread. The hollow opened, shadowed and still, its silence pressing against their ears. Ash halted, muscles taut, nose twitching at the scent of hair. "Selene," said, "be quick, be quiet." Finn crouched low, tail quivering with nervous energy. A hair darted across the frost, a flicker of life against the white ground. Ash lunged, paws digging into soil, but the prey veered sharply. Selene cut the angle, swift as memory, her body flowing through the underbrush. Finn yipped and gave chase, legs too small to match. Dane circled wide, calculating. Ash missed, jaws snapping on empty air, snow scattering around him. Selene said, "Even hunger must learn patience." Finn collapsed in the snow, panting but smiling, proud of his effort. The hair vanished, leaving only silence and shame. Ash sank onto his haunches, frustration burning hotter than hunger. "Selene," said, "strength wasted in anger feeds nothing." Her voice cut like winter wind. Finn pressed against Ash's leg, panting, his small body trembling. Ash lowered his head, nuzzling the pup, though his eyes were tired. Dane stepped closer, his gaze glinting with accusation. Ash snarled, forcing him back into the shadows. Above, crows circled lazily, waiting for weakness. Selene said, "Even the sky mocks our hunger." The wind picked up, shaking brittle branches, scattering frost across their coats. Finn said, "I almost caught it," his voice bright with innocence. Ash pressed his muzzle against Finn's ear and said, "Almost is enough to live another day." The forest echoed with silence, and the emptiness grew heavier. The trees thinned, opening to the river's frozen edge. Ash stepped onto the ice, each paw pressing carefully. "Selene," said, "the river carries truth and danger." Finn scampered behind, slipping but laughing. Dane paced on the opposite bank, tail flicking. Ash said, "This way. Food hides beneath." The ice groaned beneath their weight, warning of betrayal. Finn peered into the cracks, eyes wide at the shadows below. Selene barked low, "Stay close, little one." A fish flickered beneath the surface, silver against black. Ash lunged, paw striking through a thin layer, sending shards flying. Finn yipped, tail wagging, hope alive. Dane snarled across the river, his voice carried by the wind. The ice creaked louder, and silence swallowed their triumph. Ash pulled his paw back, dripping water freezing instantly in the air. "Selene," said, "risk is not reward if it breaks you." Finn pressed closer, eyes shining with stubborn courage. Dane paced with hunger, gnawing deeper than patience. Ash growled low, his voice shaking with exhaustion. The fish escaped into the dark, a glimmer gone forever. The river groaned again, echoing like an old wound. Selene said, "We walk away or the river will claim us." Finn shivered, small body fragile against the wind, yet his spirit unbroken. Ash pressed his nose to the pup's back, urging him forward. Dane vanished into the trees, a ghost waiting for weakness. The forest closed again around them, heavy with hunger and silence. The forest pressed in closer, shadows thickening like the weight of the world. Ash felt the change, the drop in temperature that spoke of storms or worse. Selene said, "The scent is wrong, it's not just hunger." Finn, a step behind, looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. The wind carried a familiar scent, one that turned Ash's stomach with its raw, metallic edge. Dane's ears perked, and he snarled, "It's not right." The pack stopped, instinct pulling them into stillness. The prey was near, but it wasn't the kind they hunted. Ash's hackles rose, and Selene's voice was low, "Dangerous, it's a rival pack." The ground trembled underfoot as the wind howled louder, announcing the arrival of a storm that wasn't just in the sky. Ash glanced at Finn, his heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. The wind carried a distant howl, chilling and too close. The trees parted as Ash led them forward, each step careful. Selene whispered, "The rival pack is closer than we think. They can smell us." The ground underfoot felt softer now, damp with the rising humidity. Finn's paws left tiny imprints in the wet earth, his movements quick and nervous. Ash's gaze flicked over to Dane, whose silence spoke volumes. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of wet leaves and the unmistakable odor of another pack's territory. Selene's voice was steady but filled with urgency. "Stay close, do not break formation." The wolves moved in synchronized steps, every muscle coiled for the inevitable. The tension was palpable, suffocating the air as the earth seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, a low growl echoed through the trees, confirming their worst fear. Ash's ears flicked toward the distant growls. The sound cut through the trees like a knife. "Selene said, 'They've found us.'" Finn crouched, his small body trembling despite his best efforts. Dane growled low, his body tense, ready to spring. "It's no longer just hunger," Ash said, voice taut with warning. "It's survival." They moved forward, muscles tense, their steps light on the wet earth. The rival pack was near, but it wasn't just the wolves they feared. The land itself seemed to turn against them. The rain fell harder, and the distant growl grew into something worse, a challenge, a warning. Ash growled, no time to waste. His pack needed him now more than ever. Selene stayed close, every muscle poised for the coming storm. The first attack came without warning. A blur of fur and teeth, faster than the storm itself. Ash reacted instinctively, springing forward to meet the oncoming wolf. The rival pack was here. Selene growled, "Defend." The wolves collided, in a chaotic frenzy. Finn yelped, darting to the side to avoid the fight. The ground shook beneath the skirmish, leaves and mud flying. Ash's teeth found purchase in the rival wolf's neck, and the wolf let out a howl of pain. Selene was locked in her own battle, her snarls mixing with the chaos. Dane was a shadow, swift and ruthless, taking down a second rival with brutal efficiency. But the rival pack was relentless, too many in number, too fast for the pack to escape unscathed. Ash's voice rang out, "We hold this ground, no retreat." The pack rallied, but it was clear. This fight would be a test of survival. The battle raged on, the forest echoing with the sounds of combat. Ash's breath came in ragged gasps as he fought tooth and claw against the rival wolf. The scent of blood filled the air, both his and theirs. Selene was beside him, her growls like thunder, pushing back against the wave of attackers. Finn's small yelps were drowned out by the chaos, but Ash could hear him still struggling to find his place. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rival pack began to retreat, their wolves limping or carrying wounds. Ash stood over his fallen opponent, his body shaking with exhaustion. "We hold this ground," he repeated, the words now an unspoken vow. Dane surveyed the pack, his eyes sharp despite the weariness. The forest was quiet again, save for the distant rumble of the storm. But the victory came at a cost. Ash's pack moved through the dense forest, the shadows of the trees stretching long into the early evening. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Selene's eyes darted nervously between the trees, her voice low, "We've walked too far." Ash's jaw tightened, knowing what she meant. The rival pack had followed them, but there was something else, an unease that gnawed at his instincts. "It's not just them," Ash said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something is hunting us." Finn was at Ash's side, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What do we do?" he asked. "Dane, Always the quiet one. Finally spoke, his voice cold. We keep moving, or we'll be caught. Ash nodded, but his thoughts were on the hunt that was already upon them. The trees seemed to close in, the silence becoming heavier with each step. It wasn't just the rival pack. There was something darker in the forest, something that was closing in around them. They paused at the edge of a shallow ravine, the scent of fresh water mixing with the familiar earthy musk of their pack. Ash's ears flicked back as he listened to the wind. The air's too still, he muttered, his voice tinged with suspicion. Selene's gaze swept the horizon, searching for anything out of place. We've been here before, she said, her voice low. The forest remembers us. The silence pressed in on them, the birds that had once filled the air now absent. We should cross, Dane said, his tone unyielding. The longer we stay, the more dangerous this place becomes. Finn shifted uneasily, his small body instinctively leaning toward Ash. What's wrong? He asked quietly. Ash hesitated, looking down at his pack. We've crossed into their territory, he said. And they know we're here. The first sound came like thunder, a low rumbling growl that echoed through the ravine. Ash's ears shot up, and he turned sharply, his eyes locking onto the shadows at the edge of the trees. They're here, he growled, teeth bared. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath them as the rival pack appeared from the darkness, their forms emerging like ghosts. Selene moved into position beside Ash, her gaze fierce. They've been tracking us, she said. The rival pack, led by a towering black wolf, stood at the opposite side of the ravine, their eyes glowing with hunger. We've made our stand, Ash said, voice low and filled with resolve. We fight now, or we're hunted. Finn's small body shook beside him, his voice barely audible. We'll win, right? Dane's low growl was the only answer, his eyes cold and calculating. The battle was imminent, but it wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about dominance. The two packs clashed with a ferocity that shook the ground beneath them. Ash leaped toward the black wolf, his teeth snapping with precision. The rival leader growled in response, dodging and striking with powerful swipes. Selene and Dane were locked in combat, their snarls filling the air as the rain began to pour once more, adding chaos to the fray. Finn, caught between fear and instinct, lunged at one of the smaller rivals, his sharp little teeth finding purchase on the enemy's flank. Stay close, Finn. Ash barked, but his voice was lost in the clash of battle. Selene slammed into another rival, knocking them to the ground. We will not yield, she roared. Ash twisted, his body moving with the rhythm of battle, every strike calculated to cripple, every movement designed to survive. In the midst of the chaos, the ground beneath them began to tremble once more, a distant sound approaching like thunder. The rival pack began to retreat, their leader howling in frustration. Ash stood, chest heaving with exertion, watching them fade into the forest. We've won for now, he muttered, though his heart was heavy. But this isn't over. Selene moved to his side, her eyes still fierce but filled with relief. They'll come again, but we'll be ready. Dane's voice was quiet, his words cutting through the air like a knife. They won't come unprepared next time. Finn stepped up beside Ash, his small body still trembling, but his eyes bright with pride. We made them leave, he said, his voice filled with awe. Ash looked down at the pup, his expression softening. Yes, Finn, but this is only the beginning. The pack stood together, the echoes of battle still hanging in the air. The forest, once dark and silent, now seemed alive with the hum of uncertainty. Ash knew the storm was far from over. The forest was unnervingly quiet. The aftermath of the battle still hung in the air like the lingering smell of smoke. Ash stood at the edge of the clearing, watching the darkening sky. The sun had disappeared completely, leaving only the faintest traces of light on the horizon. Selene's voice cut through the silence. We've held them off for now, but they'll be back. Ash's tail twitched in frustration. I know, he said quietly. But we can't stay here. We need to move. Finn was huddled close to Ash, his small body trembling from exhaustion. Where do we go? Finn asked, his voice small. Dane looked to Ash, his eyes filled with a cold determination. "There's nowhere safe," Dane said. "The only way out is forward." Selene nodded, her gaze steady. "We move tonight." The tension in the air was palpable, but the pack had no choice. The hunt had only just begun. The pack moved quickly through the night, the only sounds being their paws against the forest floor and the occasional snap of a branch. The air was thick with tension, and Ash could feel the weight of every step. Selene moved beside him, her body low, her breath steady. "They know we're here," Ash said, his voice grim. "We have to move faster." Dane was at the rear, eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. "No one is following yet," he muttered. Finn was stumbling behind, his energy waning from the long day and the adrenaline of the battle. "I can't keep up," Finn whimpered, his legs weak. Ash turned to him, his expression softening. "You're doing fine, little one," Ash said, nudging him forward. "Just keep moving." The forest around them was dark, impenetrable, the trees looming like specters in the night. Hours passed in the darkness. The pack had made it through the worst of the forest, but Ash could feel the fatigue weighing on each of them. "We need to rest," Selene said, her voice low but firm. Ash nodded but didn't speak, his gaze fixed on the ground ahead. Finn's energy had completely drained, and he was leaning heavily against Ash's side. "Can we stop for a while?" Finn asked softly. Ash's heart ached at the sight of the small pup, but he knew they couldn't afford to rest for long. "We'll stop, but only for a little while," he said. The pack settled into a small hollow in the forest, the trees blocking out most of the light. Selene kept watch, her eyes constantly scanning for any signs of danger. The stillness of the forest pressed in around them, broken only by the distant sound of wind rustling through the trees. The first sign of danger came as a faint rustle in the leaves. Selene's head snapped up, her ears straining to catch the sound. "They're here," she whispered. Ash's heart raced as he stood, motioning for the pack to rise. The scent of the rival pack was on the wind, too close. "Get ready," Ash said, his voice low but commanding. The pack gathered quickly, their movements synchronized despite their exhaustion. "We've held them off once," Ash muttered, his eyes steely. "We can do it again." The rustling grew louder, closer now, and Ash could see shadows moving in the trees. "We fight," Selene said firmly, her voice full of resolve. The tension was unbearable, but the pack was ready. They had no choice. The rival pack charged without hesitation, and the fight erupted in a frenzy. Ash collided with the lead wolf, teeth sinking into flesh, his body a blur of motion as he fought with everything he had. Selene was beside him, her growls fierce as she fought off another rival. Finn darted to the side, his small body weaving through the chaos. Ash's focus was razor sharp, every muscle moving in perfect synchronization. He could feel the weight of the pack on his shoulders, but he knew they had to survive. The rival pack was strong, but Ash would not let them break his family. "Hold your ground," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The battle raged on, each moment feeling like an eternity. But Ash knew this fight would define them. Win or lose, the pack's survival depended on it. The silence after the battle was almost worse than the fighting itself. Ash stood in the middle of the clearing, breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The others were scattered around him, the tension in the air palpable. Selene was first to speak. "We've survived, but at what cost?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. Ash turned to face her, his eyes hard but tired. "We hold the line, Selene. We don't have another choice." Finn sat at the edge of the clearing, his small frame hunched in exhaustion. "We're safe now, right?" he asked, his voice trembling. "For now," Ash answered, glancing back at the dense forest. Dane stood in the distance, silent as always, his expression unreadable. "There's no peace in survival," Dane muttered. "Only another fight waiting to happen." Ash didn't reply. He couldn't. They had won this battle, but there was no joy in the victory. The forest felt empty, as if the earth itself was waiting for the next chapter of their struggle. They continued their journey, moving silently through the trees, the weight of their battle hanging over them. Ash could feel the weariness in every step, but he knew they couldn't stop. "We need shelter," Selene said, breaking the silence. "The rain will make the ground impossible to move through." Ash nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll find a cave, somewhere sheltered. Just keep moving." Finn, still struggling to keep up, looked up at Ash. "Why do we keep going?" he asked quietly. "We fight to survive, Finn. That's all we can do," Ash replied, his voice low. The storm was approaching, the wind picking up, gusts of cold air cutting through the trees. They needed to find shelter before it hit. But with every step, the sense of danger grew. The rival pack was still out there, and Ash knew that the storm wasn't the only thing they had to fear. The cave they found was small, but it offered the shelter they needed. Ash motioned for the pack to settle inside. The storm hit soon after, the sound of rain pelting against the stone, and the wind howling through the trees outside. Selene lay down, her body curled tightly, her eyes closed, but her senses still alert. "We've made it for now," she said, her voice hoarse. Ash nodded, but his thoughts were far from calm. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice almost a growl. Dane, sitting in the corner, said nothing, his eyes scanning the entrance of the cave. "How long can we keep running?" Finn asked, his voice small but filled with the weight of the question. Ash didn't answer immediately. "As long as it takes," he said finally. "But we don't run forever. One day, we stand." The storm raged outside, but inside the cave, the silence was deafening. They all knew the truth, there was no safety here, only a temporary reprieve. The storm passed, but the silence remained. The pack had rested, but Ash could feel the weight of the world pressing down on them. "We can't stay here forever," Ash said, his voice heavy. "We need to find food, and we need to move before they catch up." Selene stood, stretching her limbs. "The river is close," she said, looking to the north. "We can follow it." Finn, still exhausted but determined, stood up. "Will we be safe?" he asked, his voice a whisper. "For now," Ash replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But we can never be sure." The pack gathered, their eyes full of resolve. "We move," Ash said. And with that, they left the cave, stepping back into the world, knowing that every step forward meant a new challenge, a new danger. They moved along the riverbank, the sound of rushing water filling the air. Ash's muscles ached with each step, but he pushed forward, his mind focused on the path ahead. The air felt thick with the scent of the forest, and yet Ash knew they were being watched. "We're not alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Selene nodded, her eyes darting between the trees. "They're close." Dane, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. "We can't keep running." Ash stopped, turning to face his pack. "Then we fight," he said, the words coming with a weight they had all been avoiding. Finn looked up at Ash, his small face full of determination. "We fight to survive," he said softly. And so they stood together, facing the uncertainty of the future, knowing that the fight was far from over. The horizon stretched out before them, a pale line of light breaking through the darkness. Ash's pack had traveled far, the forest finally thinning as they reached the edge of the valley. The sound of the rushing river was a constant companion, its rhythm both calming and ominous. The world felt different now, older, harsher. "We've made it this far," Selene said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of everything they had endured. "But it's not over, is it?" Ash turned to face her, his eyes sharp with the determination of a leader who had seen too much. "No," he said. "It's never over." Finn, exhausted but resolute, stumbled slightly, his paws heavy against the ground. "Where do we go now?" he asked. "We survive," Ash replied, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They would face it together, no matter what lay ahead. They continued their journey down the valley, the land growing steeper and more unforgiving with each step. The scent of unfamiliar plants filled the air, a reminder that they were entering new territory. "Stay alert," Ash warned, his voice low but commanding. The landscape was vast, stretching out into the unknown. Selene's eyes flickered between the pack, her instincts sharp as ever. "This place is different," she said, a hint of unease in her voice. "We can't be sure what waits ahead." The trees began to thin, the underbrush giving way to rocky terrain. "We'll find shelter," Ash reassured her. "We keep moving no matter what." The uncertainty in the air was palpable, but they pressed on. Finn looked up at Ash, a small flicker of worry in his eyes. "Will we be okay?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. "We'll survive," Ash said firmly, his voice steady as he led them onward. Night fell quickly, and the pack found a small hollow among the rocks to rest. The cold air bit at their skin, but the shelter offered a brief respite. Ash lay down, his body aching from the journey. Selene was curled up beside him, her body stiff with tension, but her eyes soft. "Do you think we'll find peace?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ash didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out into the darkness. "Peace is an illusion," he said finally. "We survive, and that's enough." Finn, nestled between Ash and Selene, shifted restlessly, his small body twitching in his sleep. "It's hard to sleep," he mumbled. "I know," Ash replied, his voice gentle. "But we rest when we can. Tomorrow we move again." The sound of the wind howling through the rocks filled the silence, and Ash closed his eyes, the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The next day, the pack continued their journey, the landscape becoming even more desolate as they moved further into unfamiliar territory. The terrain was harsh, with jagged rocks and sparse vegetation. "We need to find water," Selene said, her voice filled with concern. Ash nodded, his pace quickening. "We'll find it," he said, though there was uncertainty in his voice. Finn was struggling to keep up, his small body growing weaker with each step. "I'm thirsty," he whimpered. Ash turned back, his heart aching. "Hold on, Finn, we're close." The journey felt endless, the air growing thicker, the weight of the silence pressing down on them. "Stay close," Ash said, his voice commanding but filled with concern. "We don't know what's out here." The pack continued forward, the uncertainty of what lay ahead hanging heavy in the air. They finally reached a small stream, the sound of running water a relief to their parched throats. The pack drank eagerly, their bodies sore and weary. Finn, his energy renewed, looked up at Ash. "Will we be okay now?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Ash paused, looking at the clear water flowing before them. "For now we are," he said. Selene sat down beside him, her body tired, but her eyes soft. "We've come a long way," she said quietly. "But it's not over, is it?" Ash turned to her, his expression serious. "No, it's never over, but we keep moving." The pack sat in silence for a moment, the water flowing past them, a symbol of the journey ahead. It was endless, but they would face it together. And that was enough.